And then we'll have our interpreters, Talis and Eda, go ahead and run us through some of our opening slides so everyone is on the same page about interpretation today.
Y Talis nos va a mostrar algunas diapositivas para que todos estemos usando bien la interpretación el día de hoy. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Hola, buenos días a todos. Como dijo Rebecca, yo me llamo Talis, estoy aquí con mi cointérprete Ada y vamos a estar proporcionando interpretación simultánea durante la llamada del día de hoy. Y para accederla, para todas las personas que no sean completamente bilingües en inglés y en español, si están aquí a través de una computadora, hay un globito en la parte inferior, en medio, que dice interpretación. Pueden hacer clic ahí y ahí van a poder seleccionar su canal de preferencia, inglés o español, en el que quieren escuchar y participar en la llamada. De nuevo, si son bilingües en inglés y en español, no necesitan seleccionar un canal. Si están aquí a través de un teléfono inteligente, hay 3 puntitos en la parte inferior derecha que dicen más. Pueden hacer clic ahí, seleccionar interpretación de idiomas y de nuevo seleccionar su canal de preferencia. Hi, good morning, everyone. As Rebecca said, my name is Talis. I am here with my co-interpreter, Ada, and we will be providing simultaneous interpretation between English and Spanish during today's call. And to access it, for everybody who is not completely bilingual in English and Spanish, if you're here via a computer, there is a little globe at the bottom center of your screen that says interpretation. If everybody who's not bilingual could please go ahead and click that, and then you can select your language of preference, English or Spanish, in which you would like to listen and participate in the call in. Once again, if you are bilingual, you don't need to do anything, but if you're not fully bilingual, please go ahead and select the English channel, including presenters and attendees and everybody. If you're here via a smartphone, there are 3 little dots at the bottom right corner of your Zoom app that say more. You can click there, select language interpretation, and once again, select the English channel if that is your preferred language. Y solamente un recordatorio de por favor hablar a un ritmo moderado, especialmente cuando estamos leyendo o hablando de algo muy emocionante. Tendemos a acelerarnos, así que por favor, hablar un poquito más despacio ya que estamos interpretando todo lo que están diciendo al inglés al mismo tiempo. Entonces, para no perdernos de nada, por favor, hablen un poquito más despacio. Just a friendly reminder to please speak at a moderate pace, especially when we read or if we're talking about something very exciting. We tend to speed up a lot more than we realize. So just a reminder, we're interpreting everything you're saying in real time into Spanish. So slow it down for us, please, so that we don't miss out on anything that you say. Y por último, si tienen cualquier problema con la interpretación, déjenos saber a través del chat y les ayudaremos en cuanto podamos. Lastly, if you have any issues with interpretation, just let us know through the chat and we will help you out as soon as we can. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again and good morning to everyone. And thank you again to our interpreters that are joining us today. And thank you to our group being so patient with us as we're trying this for this is our second time, this is our second session, but our first time doing this overall. So we're excited about that. For everyone that I can see, they look bushy-eyed and ready to go. I hope you have your coffee for day 2. And today we're going to be covering board governance. I'd like to do a quick welcome from our ED who couldn't join us today, Jean Tedrow, but she sends her best wishes for a great day of learning. And to thank our sponsors, Z. Smith Reynolds, Guilford Nonprofit Consortium, Duke Continuing Studies, and CARI. So we appreciate you being here. Let's go on to our agenda for today. Just as we did last time, we have a brief introduction. We're going to go over your results and findings from the capacity you all completed last time. Then we're going to our board governance topics, which you can see there on the screen. And then if we can ask you, if you can take a brief moment just to gather, you'll need some paper, pencils, pen, markers, something you can mark up, and you're going to do some work today, some good activities. So make sure you have those materials near to you as we go forth.
Oh, sorry.
Uh-huh. I'm sorry, I thought someone was saying something. As you know, last week, we also went through, and we'll go through each and every week about safe spaces to brave spaces. And these are just rules for group work that we can all keep in mind. As you can, I'll read them again each week. I won't read them, but I'll read them today since it's only our second, and we may have some new people with us. We encourage participation from all as much as possible. And when Dr. Palmer when we're in gallery mode, she may ask you to turn your cameras on so we can have engagement of conversation. We respect the inherent humanity and perspectives of others. So seek first to understand, not to be understood. And we all take responsibility to demonstrate a collective commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So please keep these points in mind as we're discussing. Any questions that may come up, please pop them in the chat, and my team will make sure that we're monitoring them to make sure Dr. Palmer will see them or something that needs to be addressed. So with that, not to take up too much time because you have a pretty full day today, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Palmer.
Good morning, everyone. And as Lisa said, it is definitely good to see all of you. I think she said bright-eyed or bushy-tailed.
Bushy-tailed, that's right. Bright-eyed and
one of
bushy-tailed.
those. But definitely good morning, and we are so glad to see you again for our second session. A couple of things I do want to just kind of remind us of in terms of some things that we mentioned last week. Our format for our work in these sessions is hands-on and participatory, and we try to create or have tried to create a series related to nonprofit management that is live and interactive. And it's not a traditional webinar type of experience. And so we won't have a slide deck just kind of running for 3 hours and I'm just kind of talking to those slides. We will actually be engaged in doing hands-on work. And so just wanted to remind you of that. By all means, though, if you need to take a break before we get to a break, by all means do so. We try to time those based on where we are in the material. And so sometimes it may not necessarily be a hard stop every hour or every 45 minutes or something like that. But we work those breaks in based on the material that we're covering. And when we reach a certain point, then we kind of feel the release to kind of go into a break. So I just wanted to point that out. And Lisa did just kind of mention and ask you to just kind of gather, not right away, but to have just some blank paper, markers, pencils, or pen, just something to write with, because you'll be using some plain paper today. So if you would just kind of do that at the onset. I think that's all for my little bit of housekeeping as it goes. If we could go to the gallery view now, that would be great. So our topic today is board governance. However, we are going to review our capacity assessment results and talk about that before we go into our new material. And I'm just looking at everyone that I can see. As I mentioned before, I really like to try to be in this space with us. And oftentimes the gallery view is where I tend to have the team to keep us. So, so at any rate, we're going to go into breakout rooms at the top of our time together today. And but before we do that, I think I did this last week, but we were meeting for the very first time. So let me do a check-in. Has everyone had their coffee or tea or Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whatever that beverage is that you have to get your day going? I'm hoping that you've been able to get your day started with that. Thank you, April, for that animated thumbs up there. And so I'm a coffee drinker, and so I always like to have at least a cup to get my day going. So it looks like you all are ready to go. So, like I said before, we are going to go into breakout sessions right from the beginning. And what we want you to do is just reflect on last week's session. And without looking at your notes and without opening up your material, we want you to go into breakouts and share with your colleagues what you remember from last week's session. What you remember. And even more importantly, what do you remember that is very clear to you? Very, very clear from last week's material. What is that one thing that when you think about your time with us last week, you are very, very clear about what? What are you very, very clear about? And so Rebecca is going to put you into breakout rooms. And we're going to do 10 minutes, I believe.
Great, sounds good.
Mhm.
So it's about 9:45 now, so we'll come back at 9:55. I'll pop in there in the breakout chat so you all can remember what the task is at hand. And just a note too that our bilingual folks will stay here in the main room. If you're still here in the main room and you wish to be in one of the English speaking breakout rooms, just raise your hand or let me know. I can pop you in pretty easily, but hopefully I have the groups all manually built. So here we go. We'll see y'all in a few.
One of the things that I hope was organic in your breakout rooms was introducing yourselves. I hope we didn't, blatantly give that instruction, but hopefully, if you didn't know each other, you were able to do that. So share with us what it is that you remember, or that was very clear to you from last week. And maybe what we can do is have that one theme, if there was a theme that presented itself as you were having your discussion, or not. So if we could hear from all 5 groups, that would be great. And if you could share with us in about 30, 60 seconds, that would be great. And you could just unmute yourself, and or you could use the chat as well.
We were group 3, and I think we pretty much zeroed in on, build, thrive, and sustain, and how helpful that was to us. And I believe it probably was a general consensus as well that we were seeing this as more secular than linear, and that, you're going through these various life cycles of your organization. And so it was beneficial. I think we also agree that this is a whole lot, and we're glad that we didn't know it when we started. Otherwise, we'd be doing something else.
Absolutely agreed. No. Thank you for sharing. And if I could have someone from the team, Mr. Holliday mentioned the life cycle of a nonprofit, and there is a book source. We shared it at the end last week, but if we could just share that with the group again. This is a resource that I use, and I've seen it used quite a bit, but it gives a really practical overview of the life cycle of a nonprofit organization. And that is another frame that you can refer to when you are, if I could use the term of group 3, when you have a lot to do. Being able to frame this work in a way that makes sense to you as the person either leading and managing a nonprofit or trying to be supportive of someone who is. So that resource is very, very, very helpful. Any other group that would like to?
I think we can piggyback off of Reginald as well. The common topic was the assessment, but more so, it doesn't need to be something that you do, every 5 years. Keeping it a working live document, because we had organizations that were start up at 2 or 3 years and organizations that's been around for 26 years. And again, you float in between some of those stages there. So making sure it's something that you're checking in on frequent. And then I think the last part of that was something Andre mentioned last week about if we could provide this assessment to our boards. They're going to maybe be doing a retreat type thing, but the key to that is it becomes a live document. So what happens when it comes to implementation? So I think that was the consensus of the group.
And it's Tranisha, right? Is it Tranisha? Thank you for sharing. Capacity building is fluid. Enhancing our ability to do the work that we do, it's fluid. Because while we're building capacity in this institute this morning, the day-to-day operations are still happening at the nonprofits that we represent. So it doesn't stop. So I really want to lean in on the feedback from your group to Tranisha as it relates to it's alive, it's living, it's not a box you check. It's work that we're doing each and every day to incorporate these practices so that as time progresses, we are getting to and achieving and developing the way in which we would like to. That's very important because sometimes I find when I'm working with, in particular, executive directors and presidents and CEOs of nonprofits who want to do capacity building and to incorporate these practices, they're trying to do it, check it off, and then go to the next thing. And it's not that type of living reality that we face in nonprofits. And we'll continue to get into that more, but I just wanted to lift that point up. And thank you for sharing with your group. Is it Leslie? I see you're at Covington. I have to say that because we have a Leslie as well.
I know there's like 3 of us on here.
Yeah.
One of the things that just kind of came out of my mind, came out in this whole situation was, I know some of us are older in the nonprofit world, some of us are younger, but that tool put us all on the same page. And it should not have made anybody feel, too much in their, younger or infancy stages. Literally, it put us all on the same page. We all will be at build at times, no matter how long we've existed. And so to me, it kind of gave me comfort of, look, you have a crew here and you're not in a silo, you're not alone. And all nonprofits are dynamic in that way. So I appreciated feeling like a part of this big, huge nonprofit family.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Point taken. Yes. That was 3 of our 6 groups. I don't want to leave anyone out. And I thought I saw something in the chat from, was it group 5?
I also put group 2 in the chat as well. We appreciated how detailed the questions were because it kind of helped us understand what we didn't know, and you don't realize what you don't know. So it helped us really be able to focus in on what each stage meant, and it put everybody on an equal playing field with expectation. And it also gave us a tool to be able to talk with coworkers. So that way we can get coworkers who may think we're at one place and someone else thinks we're at another place, and maybe get us all on the same page.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you.
Well, I think our group didn't mention anything, right? I would say that also the capacity assessment that we did individually, the organizations, was one of the most takeaways, especially for me, because so it made me think like in the different areas of our organization instead of thinking of the whole. So to be more focused on what are the aspects where we have to be more strategic about advancing or to do something to do better. So, and as someone else said, so after 20 more years in the community, you should think that you should be in the sustainable part already in every area. But and yeah, so and you feel proud of that until well, not that I don't feel proud, but I was like, wow, I didn't think about all of this before, and which ways we're really. So when you really see a description of what it means to be on a built area, on thrive or sustain, you really notice that there are many things that are still to be done, that we need to learn about it.
Mhm, mhm. And it's ongoing. It's ongoing.
It's ongoing. Yes,
Ongoing.
it's ongoing.
Yeah.
In our
It-
work, we always say that it's about organizing, disorganizing and reorganizing.
There
So
you go.
it's something like that, because every time like things change, the
Mhm.
community changes also. So you have to be like redoing everything and rethinking everything again.
Mhm.
So that's
Yes.
good. Mhm.
Yes, and again, it is our ability to grow and develop is impacted significantly by what's happening externally as well as internally. And so we just have to continue. We just don't want to stop. We want to continue to focus on enhancing our ability. And we in the Nonprofit Management Institute, the assessment grounds us. So I'm so happy to hear that in some of your feedback. It does ground us, and we're going to focus on 6 of those principles, i.e. management functions. We're going to focus on 6 of those. So we're not focusing on all 12. We're focusing on 6, and we're going to be looking at those results here in just a second from the entire group. Did I leave anybody out, Lisa or Rebecca or Leslie? I didn't want to leave a group out.
I think you've gotten most of them. Mhm.
Okay,
That I can
great,
tell.
great.
I was just
and-
gonna add, Dr. Palmer, that there's a level of, I think the most important thing about, and kind of going towards what Leslie Covington was saying, there's a level of humility and self-awareness, especially for those organizations that have been around, like we have for 55 years or something like that. There's a level of humility and self-awareness to not, I think one of the biggest things we talked about last week was when you go from the point where you're tooting your own horn to other people are tooting your horn for you, that's when you have arrived. And even when you arrive, I threw this in the chat, but last week was also a great reminder of that never ending good to great journey. So
Thank you so much for that, for all of your feedback. Yes, and we're going to get to know each other really well, right, over these next sessions as we're learning more and growing and developing, and we have questions and we have comments and thoughts and feedback and all of that helps us to be able to kind of move along as well. While our organizations are uniquely different, there are elements that are very, very close to the same. And so we've crafted this in a way so that we can speak to that. And the work that we're going to do today is specifically around board governance. We're going to look at the results here. And Rebecca, but I think there's a couple things that you wanted to highlight. Is that right, as far as the Facebook group page? Or do we want to?
Oh, we can save that for later.
Okay.
We'll go over that later. Thank you, though.
Yeah. So in terms of also just kind of thinking about, so we had you reflect on what was very, very clear to you in terms of last week. We're moving into a new topic, like I said, this week, and we want you to begin thinking about board governance. I'm going to share the results team first, and then I'm going to come back to that best practices related to board governance. So if we could go ahead and show the capacity assessment results and findings document. And everyone received this in your wraparound. So I just want to highlight just a few points related to our topics and just kind of what we said we wanted to work on within the next year. And so keeping in mind, we had several practices under each of these areas for each of the principles. So we're looking at board governance now. And we had 2 competing practices, and those came in at 57% of us indicated that this would be something that we wanted to work on. Job descriptions, looking at the composition of the board, making sure that individuals are really representing our best interest, wanting to make sure that we do that. When you get to Thrive, we had another, what I noticed when I was looking at the results is that there are several practices that kind of landed right about the same in terms of what we collectively want to focus on as it relates to growing and developing. So under Thrive, it was looking at the demographics and the characteristics of the board, and then making sure that the board supports the strategic planning process. And so this is kind of where we are with Thrive. We can kind of scroll up. Here we go again, competing practices in terms of the areas that we want to work on. So here is the first one was making sure that board members understand their roles and making sure that the board embraces the culture and that they embrace an inclusive culture, and also as it relates to diversity. So that was kind of the area of focus there. And of course, this is our topic for today. So we'll be covering quite a bit of this. Program design management and evaluation is the next principle that we identified where we wanted to focus on in terms of our work. 70% of us said we want to consult with community partners and to look at the need for programs and services and make sure we are making the best use of our overall resources. That was under Build. Under Thrive, we had number 1 was focused on fund development strategies and to acquire and maintain fees for services and/or donations. So we wanted to learn how to incorporate those strategies. And we do have fundraising as one of our principles that we focus on in this institute. Under Sustain, 70% secure funds using proven fund development strategies. There's the fund development strategies again. And so we know that when we diversify where our dollars are coming from, that we're in better shape. And that is a part of that learning that we'll do as it relates to fundraising. This particular principle was program design, management, and eval. And I hear you when we have to have the funds in order to make sure that we engage in fund development. And the next one is strategic planning. Number 1 under Build was to implement an action plan to guide our day-to-day operations. That was number 1. Here we go again with under Thrive, we had all three of these, 66% of us said we wanted to focus on some of those salient parts of the strategic planning process as it relates to looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as it relates to making sure the plan is formatted and put together in a way that illustrates direction. And then the third one, that kind of annual review of the plan to make sure that we are achieving our goals. Lastly, under Sustain, it was a focus on having a schedule for a periodic review. What I will say here is be sure or at least consider having, if you have a strategic plan in play, meaning you are, it is current and you are working within the parameters of that plan, it should be a part of your board meeting report out, minimally. So if you've got a strategic plan and it is current, and maybe even if it's not, there should be a place on your agenda where there is either it is the board chair or it is the executive director, that there is a report out of where are we in the implementation of the plan. That helps to keep the document, that helps to make sure and ensure that it's a live document and that it's not just kind of dormant after you develop it. Financial management, under build, we said that we wanted to have a strategy to establish financial reserves. I could put some just happy hands for that one. We all would like to have reserves. And then under Thrive, to have strategies to diversify where our resources are coming from. And then also looking at new revenue generating strategies. So that's where the emphasis is there. And then for fundraising, number one, under build, inform donors of activities and programs. We have two competing items under Thrive, the annual campaign and research and writing grants that align with the mission and the programs. And then under sustain, present plan giving opportunities to donors. So kind of having all of that working at the same time. Human resources. Number one, create volunteer and staff opportunities that accommodate a variety of voices and perspectives and physical abilities. That was under build. And then our number one under Thrive is implement the annual cost of living increases. We know that can be very, very difficult. And then under sustain, create and implement a board approved succession policy. So having a succession plan, having a backup in the event that our CEO or our executive director, there's a situation where they may not be available to us. What will we do and how will we function? Something that I'm seeing quite a bit of, and I'm working with, I would say, a few nonprofit boards currently, is the fact that they have a executive director or a president and CEO who is retiring, and they are working through that transition. Rebecca, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a quick request to speak a little more slowly for our interpreters.
Okay, all right, sure, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Keep reminding me. So results and findings of, this is our collective results. If we could go back to gallery. So what I heard some of us say in our reflection was that completing the assessment is an exercise that you would be open to doing with your board members and or your staff. And what I will say is that oftentimes when I am facilitating the strategic planning process, I shouldn't say oftentimes, I always try to do a capacity assessment first. That is where I start. And the reason is I heard, I'm trying to remember who it was who said, it puts us on the same level. You know, we're all at the same place. And when you're going into strategic planning, that's an important kind of spirit that I have about that exercise, is that everyone has something to contribute, but utilizing the assessment as a tool to prompt growth and development, it works. It does work. And but there does have to be, or should be, an individual who is going to take those results and actually do something with them. And that is kind of the game changer, I think, is doing that. But it is a teachable moment, because there are aspects of managing a nonprofit that many of our staff may not know. And there are aspects of managing a nonprofit that many of our board members don't know. And they may have a long history of serving on boards, but they may not necessarily understand the dynamics from day to day in terms of what it actually looks like, and might I add, what it feels like to be in that executive director or president and CEO role, and managing all those different things that are happening each and every day. So I would encourage you to definitely have those discussions about assessing capacity, and more than that, how assessing capacity helps us enhance it, how it helps us enhance it. So if we could go to the next slide, or hold on, I think it's in our book. We don't have to go to the next slide. It's page 84. And in our workbook, and it's page 85 in Spanish. Did I get that right, Rebecca? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I got that right. So turn in your workbook to page 84 and or 85, depending upon which workbook you have. You know, I am very much an advocate for working with our nonprofit organizations, yes, in the state of North Carolina, but in general as well. Capacity building is definitely a part of our work that we should be real intentional about. And oftentimes we are not. And so sometimes our expectations of our nonprofit organizations are not reasonable, I'll just say. And it's not reasonable sometimes because we're not taking into consideration all of the pieces and parts of what we do. We're not taking all of that into consideration. And we put in our workbook a description of capacity, a description of capacity assessment, and a description of capacity building. Just so that we could give you the language to be used when you are talking about this thing called capacity, or capacity assessment, or capacity building. So is there any part of what you see here that doesn't make sense to you? As we have described capacity, as we have described capacity assessment, and as we have described capacity building. And Rebecca, if you would show this page, I think I saw someone said they didn't have their book, or Leslie, whichever one, thanks. So is there any part of what you see here that is just not clear to you at all? And I'm gonna pause there.
I think Carla, did you have your hand up? You're on mute, sorry. You're on mute.
Now I'm
There,
not.
there you
Hey.
go.
So, I mean, this I think is clear. I think that you could have capacity just to manage existing programs without needing growth, right? Like you may not be trying to grow. Maybe you're at a scale or something that makes sense for your organization or your community. So I question whether it has to be dependent on a growth framework.
Okay. Anybody else, just any thoughts here as it relates to capacity assessment, or capacity building? So we've shared the collective institute results and findings. And hopefully provided some insight as it relates to what we were able to find. We also know that you have your individual results that you received. And so, team, I'm not going to go into breakouts for this, but just in general, if we could go back to gallery, is there any one of us or one of you that have any thoughts, or if there was anything surprising about your individual results? And or how did it align maybe with the results of the larger group?
I thought it was interesting to see the parallels between the various organizations, no matter where we are on the life cycles. There seemed to be a great deal of similarity in terms of what we thought were priorities, which was surprising. But it's interesting to see that whether you're a few years old or 100 years old, you know, these are, like you said, there's some essential similarities that we are all going to have to deal with continually. And so that was eye-opening.
And we also know that we find ourselves working within the space of these 12 principles, whether we are being intentional about it or it's just happening to us, you know. And so we encourage us to be intentional and strategic, and kind of weigh how much of a priority we have to put on any one of these areas of management. And it does vary. Sometimes it literally varies from hour to hour. And we know it definitely varies from day to day, month to month, week to week, et cetera, year to year. Any other just kind of thoughts about kind of where your results, how your results kind of came?
I think so much of the time in nonprofit, I think in particular, we tend to be hamsters on a wheel, where we're just running and running and running just to get the daily operation going and putting out fires. And we miss some of these big things that we need to make sure that we're still paying attention to, just because we feel successful, we got through today.
And only we can change that if we want to, right? And we have to figure it out. I'm not saying it's easy. Lord knows, I'm not saying it's easy. But we do have to figure it out for our individual organizations. We have to figure that part out so that we're not hamsters on a wheel, so that we are working in a way that we are making strides in a very, very strategic manner. Scott, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. You know, one of the things that I'm trying to observe is, you know, the differences between nonprofits that are purely volunteer and those that have a paid board. You know, when we sit around board meetings sometimes, you know, we have to be mindful that the people there, they're really just doing it out of their heart, right? It's pure heart, no financial incentive. And yeah, it's a different kind of board that you're leading. So just wondering if you could comment on that.
So if we are a 501c3, we don't pay our board members. So our board members are not paid. They're all volunteers. If sometimes there are nonprofits that are set up that are only volunteer. So the work that's being delivered, the programs, the services, everything that is happening with that organization, everyone is a volunteer. And those organizations do exist. There may actually be one or two in this space with us now. So there is a difference. But if you look at it, I don't know if we have any human resource folks in the space or in the group today. But if you look at it from a human resource perspective, though, we are responsible for human resources related to volunteers and paid staff. So there is a protocol and way of interacting with individuals who are doing the work of that nonprofit, whether they're paid or not. And so though I'll just make that comment there, but there is the difference that they're not being paid, but there is not a difference in terms of quote unquote, employee relations or volunteer relations. There is something called volunteer administration. There is volunteer recruitment. There is protocol to those things. So while we might be solely volunteering, there is still a responsibility as it relates to how we interact with those volunteers that we have.
100%.
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
Any other comments here? Team, I'm looking at my our schedule here. I'm going to go ahead and do a break here, and then we will come back and begin our new material on board governance. When you come back, you will need that blank paper and crayons, colored pencils, colored markers, whatever it is you have at your disposal, pencil, pen. We just want you to be able to do some sketching on some blank paper. So team, I'm gonna ask how much time for a break do we want to do here?
I think we're going to need to keep it pretty short if we're going to get through board governance. So can we do a 5-minute break?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hope some of you were able to do, as they call it, a mindless break. So I know sometimes that's difficult. So we are going to begin our work on board governance. And I'm going to be referring to page 31 to kind of get us kicked off here in terms of board of directors and a board member. And I'd like for you to take a piece of that blank paper that you gathered or that you put aside, and I'm going to ask for an illustration. And I know that may sound a little elementary, but that's really what I mean. An illustration. So we've provided for you a definition of a board of directors and a board member on page 31. So I'm just going to pause and give you a few seconds to review that. And do we still have the situation where we have someone who doesn't have the material? Or were we able to?
So books should have all arrived by now. I've had a couple people let me know that they haven't received it yet, but sounds like everyone else should have it. In the reminder emails, we send a digital version of the English and Spanish version of that session's topics or handouts. So you can refer to that in the meantime. But just let me know if anybody else still needs me to send it in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yep.
So what we want you to do with your blank paper and whatever, I'll just say writing tools, you have chosen. By the way, what are we sketching with today? How many of us just pencil or pen? Pencil or pen? Yes. Any crayons, Crayolas, markers? Oh, I see Carla has got it. I see, is it Marley's? Is that right? Okay. Colored pencils. That is Logan. Okay, great. So what I would like for you to do is give me an illustration of your board of directors at a meeting. Give me an illustration of your board of directors at a meeting. How is, what type of space is it? And I know virtual, right? I know a lot of us are still meeting virtually. But if you can put a little bit of information there, other than the virtual kind of screening, about if you were there prior to COVID and you were actually meeting in spaces, you could divide your paper in half actually, and you could give me your virtual. What does it look like when you have a board meeting and it's virtual? What does it look like when you have a board meeting and you all are in person? So just divide your paper in half. Show me where board members sit or what the seating is like. Give me an idea of what that looks like. What does that meeting look like? I see Scott's. Thank you, Scott. And do just what Scott did. Just hold it up. We're just looking for a thumbnail sketch. What does it look like? Oh, Morgan put hers in her book. Is that a board table? I mean, is that a conference table? Okay, got it. So in terms of our board meetings and what's happening, of course, our board of directors is meeting, and then all of our members are in attendance. Let's see, Maria, is that a Post-it? Did you put yours on a Post-it note? I like it. I like it. When you hold it up, just leave it there for a minute because it takes the Zoom a second to make it clear.
If you've blurred your background, it will be hard for us to see it.
Okay.
So you may, sorry, that is the one thing about Zoom.
Yvonne, I see Yvonne's, and I see Summers, and I see Anna's. I see a lot of board tables. I see a lot of, and I see Christy has the virtual, and oh, that's a U shape for Christy in terms of in person. I see Denise, I see Leslie Patterson, I see Rebecca. Thank you all. Okay, getting a good sense of that. So let's talk about our board of directors, and I'm referring to page 31. So our board meetings is a critical exercise, right, that we do on a regular basis. Some of our board meetings meet every month, some are bi-monthly, some are annual, some are quarterly, it varies. But our board of directors is the governing body of our nonprofit. And there are some for-profit organizations that have board of directors too, or board of trustees, or investors, or however you want to describe them. The board of directors has a legal and ethical responsibility, right, for the organization. We're going to get into more detail with that. And also, oftentimes, a board of directors will have an advisory board, which is a little different than the actual board of directors. And we also know that the executive committee, which is all of the officers, the chair, the vice chair, or president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, makes up that executive committee. And we are responsible for governance and oversight. And we're going to get into the specifics of that. That is our responsibility. As a board, we are not responsible for day-to-day operations, not unless it is a volunteer nonprofit, solely volunteer. Then we're doing the day-to-day. But otherwise, if we have an executive director or president and CEO in place, it is the responsibility of that individual to manage and lead the day-to-day operations. A board member. Oftentimes what I will hear executive directors say is that I want my board to be more active. I want active board members. I want engaged board members. And my thought is always, well, what are you doing to engage them? Or what are you doing to encourage them being active? Because that is a part of the responsibility of the individual who's in that executive director or president and CEO role in partnership with the board chair. So we're working together and in partnership and collaboration with the executive committee. So that is very, very important. I'm not saying that's easy. Hear me clearly. I'm not saying that's easy. But I am saying that's what we should be working towards if we're not there. Rebecca, do you want to do the poll results to our question? And I'll let you tee that up.
Sure. Let me move this out a little bit. There we go. So we posted this poll, as we do from time to time. Each week we have a poll that speaks to the next session's topic. So we posted this last week, and a few of you have responded, having joined the Facebook group and are collaborating in this way with us. We asked what practices have worked for you to help ensure an engaged or more active board, right? And it looks like 66% indicated that asking them to do something specific related to their strengths is a helpful way to get them more engaged or more active. And then we also have 33% mentioned the onboarding and orientation process being really effective in that manner as well. One of the things I will say, if you need to know your board members if you're going to ask them to do something specific related to their strengths. So having some type of inventory as part of your onboarding is a good idea. So you can keep track and get to know them a little better. And it can be even more casual, just sitting down and getting to know them better. But thank you for participating. And for those of you that still would like to join the Facebook group, we'll send another link after today's session and you can participate in next week's poll that we post there.
So important for us, even fellow board members, and definitely the chair or the president of the board, in collaboration and partnership with that executive director or CEO, to work together to have our board members highly engaged and highly active and highly participating. It does take time. Now, what might interfere with that is term limits. So it's important to kind of study what your term limits are, because you may need to add time to your term limits so that you can really utilize the individuals that you bring on, and they're not gone before you can even get to know them, or you're able to have them be a little bit more connected and engaged. That is very, very important. I serve on several boards currently, and some of you may very well serve on boards in addition to your role with the nonprofit that you represent. I see some comments in the chat. Do I need to pause here, team, or do I need to keep going?
I think we'll get to that question as we go about term limits. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want me to share the poll about board service?
Yes, that too.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead and run that one. This asks you about your either current service on a board, past service, or if you've never served but you'd like to one day. This session will be especially important for you. So Looks like we're getting some responses coming in. Nice. Give it 2 more seconds.
And so we know that individuals serve on boards for different reasons. It is important for us, however, as the nonprofit, to know why we have asked each and every board member to serve. And then the reason in which we've asked them to serve, we need to work to ensure that they are able to contribute in that way, because otherwise they're wondering why they're there. And so many of us have served on boards. As you can see, 51% of us are currently serving, 20% of us served in the past, and then we've got 29% of us that have never served but would like to. So this idea of serving on a board is a responsibility of that individual. It is a part of their responsibility to contribute and be engaged in a way that makes sense to them. Because it is a personal commitment to volunteer to be on a board. So that's important. And we wanted to just kind of highlight and kind of check in for ourselves how many of us have served on a board or have in the past. So if you put that together, either currently or in the past, that's 71% of us have actually served on a board that's in the space today. So important for us to kind of remember and take that into consideration. There's another part of what we want to share, and that is to understand not only what the board of directors is as an entity, and not only what a board member should be or could be, but also where does the board fit into the organizational structure of a nonprofit? So we want to focus on that for just a minute. And if you could turn that piece of paper you have on the back, or if you have another piece that you can grab your writing utensils for me. And if you would illustrate for us in an org chart, using an org chart illustration, how is your nonprofit structured and where is the board of directors in that structure? It's very important to understand this notion of where is the board of directors in the structure. So you're creating an org chart of the nonprofit that you represent, and we want to know, where does the board of directors fit in that org chart? I see Summer. Okay, is that the board at the top, Summer? Yes, okay, I see you nodding yes. And I see Kim, and I see the board over here to the right. And then I see the CEO in the middle, and it looks like different departments, different areas. For Reginald, I see board at the top, and I see executive director next. And then for April, I see the city, and then the board, and then the executive director. So I'm thinking this nonprofit is affiliated with city government. Is that right? Okay. Woo, that adds a dynamic to the, you've got politicians and all of that. Morgan, I saw yours, but it went away. Okay, I think is that the board? And then you've got different departments. Okay. I see Tanya's, and is it Aura? I see, okay, all right. So team, if I could get you to show kind of what we want to communicate in terms of the nonprofit org chart. And we're looking at so here is how the positioning of the board in an org chart would be helpful. The board of directors is responsible for the governance and oversight of leading and managing a nonprofit organization. The Internal Revenue requires us, if we are a 501c3, to have a board of directors. And that board of directors is functioning in a pretty sustainable way when it has active committees. And so as a board member, I should be serving on a working committee, because committees is where the work happens in terms of the governance and oversight. And some of those committees are unique to a particular nonprofit, and some of those committees are fairly the same. So, for example, an executive committee is all of the officers. There oftentimes is a fundraising committee, a human resource committee, a program committee. It depends on what the need is for your nonprofit. And oftentimes when we are lacking in staff in a particular management function, when we are lacking in staff for a particular management function, oftentimes we will establish a committee. And depending upon our staffing, has a lot to do with the type of board members we might need in terms of how we're structured. And so then we have the executive director. Notice the board of directors is linked directly to the executive director. And those committees are working to inform the board, but also are working in partnership with the executive director, president, and CEO. Then we have the nonprofit staff, and then we have volunteers. So this is an illustration of visually kind of where we need to and how we need to think about the placement of a board of directors in the nonprofit organization. So this is how we're structured. Any questions about, and we can go back to gallery now. Any questions about the illustration? Aura, I see your hand.
Yes, thanks. I do have a question. When you've got a very small nonprofit, and in our example, you mentioned that the day-to-day operations falls under the executive director. In our nonprofit right now, really because it's necessary to do so, a number of the board members are involved in the day-to-day operations because it is so small, and we literally do much of the day-to-day in addition to the executive director. So I don't see it changing very soon unless we get much bigger, but it's really necessary because the executive director cannot manage all of the day-to-day herself. And so, and specifically, 2 of the board members are co-founders and are very, very involved in the day-to-day. So not quite sure that matches your, I guess, what we strive to be as far as organization.
How many staff do you have other than, is the executive director a paid staff person?
The executive director is paid staff, and we have 1 part-time staff.
And is the executive director one of the founders?
No.
Okay, all right. So what I would say to that is the goal here is to understand what the role of the board is. And we know that every nonprofit is different. There are different circumstances. There are different reasons why you're structured the way you're structured. I would pay very close attention to the dynamics between, because you don't want this to go in a direction that's not healthy for the organization. And I can't stay here very long because I got to move on. But what I would say is that when you have board members that are engaged in the day-to-day operations, and they are responsible for governance and oversight and evaluating that executive director, it becomes real challenging to separate me being your colleague or your staff person and me being the person that you quote unquote report to as a board member. So I'm not sure how old your organization is. All those things are factors that I would have to have more information about. But a concern I have is to be able to separate that when something goes wrong. It's all great as long as everything is going great. But as soon as something goes wrong, then all of a sudden that executive director is really put in a position, sometimes in a very vulnerable position, because not only are they reporting to that person, because that person is responsible for leading and managing the organization, they also evaluate that person. So there's that dynamic, and we can talk more offline about that, but that's my immediate thought. And here's the thing, all of what we are learning about is to help us to, you said it, Aura, strive to get there. You know, we have to get there. And what we want you to understand is that this is a way, this is a best practice way. But I can tell you that reporting to and working for, it could potentially create some scenarios. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. Is there any other hand or?
Do you have, Scott has a comment.
Okay.
In the
right.
ideal world, it seems that every member of a nonprofit should be involved in at least one defined committee. Am I right?
Yes, that's a very, that's a way to keep us active on the board, is that we at least are involved and working with a committee. But those committees have to be set up and those committees have to be functioning. That's important. I saw, go ahead, Lisa, you had said a couple more people.
Elancy, how do you pronounce it? I don't know how to pronounce your first name, sorry. I think her hand is up.
Inlace?
Inlance, you have to get off mute, there you go.
And then Denise, I see your hand, she's after Inlace, okay.
Oh, gracias. Mi pregunta tiene que ver cuando un director ejecutivo a su vez es cofundador. ¿Hay algo que la Junta puede hacer para proteger al director ejecutivo? Me refiero a que después de tantos años de trabajar y de fundar la organización, ¿cómo puedes proteger a ese director ejecutivo de un despido o de algo así? ¿Eso es algo que existe? ¿Es algo que se puede hacer o no? Gracias.
My initial response is it's not reasonable to try to protect the executive director. What we want to do is we want to utilize human resource practices, no matter who the executive director is. And just because I founded the organization and ended up being the executive director, I shouldn't be, there shouldn't be some special way, right? In terms of, because now I'm an employee of the nonprofit, period. Doesn't matter if I'm the founder. I mean, I am now an employee, and I should be ideally, the relationship between the board and that executive director should be that the executive director is an employee. Doesn't matter that I founded the organization. We can talk more in a different space, and that protect the, I'm not sure what that really means, but protect the executive director. No, the executive director has a job to do. They should be doing that job. They should be evaluated. They are employed with that nonprofit. Denise.
Good morning. I guess my concern or my comment is more that I think I would like to speak with you offline because we have a lot of issues. We are relatively young, 501c3. The board is basically out of town. They're very out of touch, and I'm speaking very frankly now. We've attempted, I've been here less than a year, but I'm basing what I'm saying on what I see, my professional experience, and what I definitely don't see. The board chair is also is a founder, the founder. And that person is serving as our executive director right now. Some of it may be based on where we're located. We're in the eastern part of the state. There's not a lot here. Like I said earlier, we're largely agricultural. And the current board is not very engaged. In looking at the board work group book, most of them have one more year that they can serve, which in my opinion is good. If it was more than that, I don't think we'd make it. But if I would like to speak with you offline, I am the closest to a full-time employee that we have. I've probably had 3 different positions since we've been here and do some of everything. We've grown very fast because of what we do. We work with environmental justice, cumulative impacts, and empowering the community to speak up for themselves when it comes to clean air, clean water, etc. And things just have happened so fast that it's kind of, I'm not gonna say put us in a quandary, but we need more guidance that we're not receiving. So again, I'd like for us to get together, even conduct a workshop for our board.
And thank you, Denise team, that I took those notes. So did we get that so that we can follow up there? Thank you, Denise, for sharing.
Thank you.
And what I will say is don't feel as though you're by yourself. There are other nonprofits across this state that are having a similar experience. We have quite a few activity in the chat, Lisa.
Yeah.
So and then I know we're going to have to move on.
Yeah.
And just for the purpose of the spirit of things, this always happens when we do board governance. This is exactly how it plays out in terms of our time together. So
well, you have quite a few. I've been trying just to pull out some of the ones that stuck out of my head, but some of the other questions, we can also do a follow-up in our wraparound emails to answer some more specific questions. But one of the ones I think I've seen a couple times, where does community fit in the org chart? And some had constructed their chart to be circular as opposed to how it was as we've seen others do. So if you can address that. And then does the ED have voting power was another. I think if you could just say something about that. I think if you can start with those two, I think I'll keep
so what I will say is that as I said in our very first session, every single nonprofit functions differently. You're set up to function in a way that is appropriate and authentic to your nonprofit. So let me say that first. And we use that hierarchical image just to kind of to convey that it is the board of directors. And to that first question, the board of directors represent the community. Your board, the composition of your board should be a representation. And let me slow down my talking. The composition of the board should be reflective of the community in which that organization is a part of. And if your nonprofit is a statewide organization, then the composition should be representative of the state. And so I'll leave that in terms of that. I am all for a circular, illustration of how your nonprofit is structured. That works for me. But the biggest takeaway is that the board of directors has the responsibility of governing that entire organization and ensuring that there's oversight that we maintain our 501c3 status. So that is why they are where they are, and they are responsible for evaluating the performance of the executive director and president and CEO. So that kind of speaks to that. And I see Jenny's hand, Lisa. I don't want to.
Okay.
Jenny?
She's off mute, but I can't hear her either. Jenny, we're not hearing you.
We don't hear you.
Yeah, she's off mute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you put it can you put it in the chat for us? It may be too much, but if you could try to do that, that would be great.
And if you can just quickly address the ED voting.
So executive directors do not vote. That's the practice. They are there as a resource. and they are there to provide information, to answer questions. They are there representing the day-to-day operations of that organization. So they should not be voting.
Mhm. I think you've addressed most, except for
Okay.
Jenny's question, but
Okay.
I'm waiting for hers to come through.
And again, this happens when we cover the board governance topic. This is exactly how it plays out, because we know that each of your organization's history is very different, and context matters as to why and how you function, your board functions or not. So we understand that. Let's
Dr.
talk-
Palmer, if I may, because as I'm scrolling through the chat, and I come from OG nonprofits where that is the practice, right? Staff members do not vote, because the idea being that you're not supposed to be voting on something that you're proposing. But I also realize that everybody does it differently. In your experiences, what are some of the situations where it does make sense for the ED or the CEO to be a voting member of the board?
I've not seen it. I don't see that. I don't see executive directors voting in board meetings. I don't see that. That's not a best practice. It's not a best practice. They are paid staff, and they are employees of that organization.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I would love to hear from somebody who is part of an organization where the ED or the CEO votes. Just, I don't know. I'm always open to hearing other ways of doing things.
Our CEO votes, but it's a part of the bylaws, and it's just the way we've been set up. The only time the CEO does not vote is with the audit committee and the audit.
And
we also have the 21-person board, so one vote.
I would like to share if I can. I know there's a lot of times, so I'm in ED, I vote on my board. Also, our nonprofit organization is going to defy all of the norms that you guys are probably accustomed to. Best practice for us isn't best practice because of nonprofit industrial complexes cause harm to the demographics that we serve. And so for us, we need lived experience to have power, because of the direct services and because of the population that we serve. So for us, it could be harmful for folks who don't have lived experience and direct access to day-to-day operations into the community we serve to exclusively make the most powerful decisions that could backfire really easily. And so similar to who was just speaking, we wrote into our bylaws these equity provisions that would allow people with lived experience, it would allow a certain amount of diversity on our board and requires them to have voting power and oversee some of the major decisions. And so I think we are, though, pretty much going to be an exception to every rule, because like I said, what we're doing is so innovative. There isn't an evidence-based and best practice. If we were to follow the rule book, we would continue to screw our community.
Any other comments about that? I stand my ground. The executive director, we're not talking about majority of voting. We're talking about one individual whose responsibility is to lead and manage that nonprofit organization. And they are responsible for making all the decisions related to the organization, and to have that individual to be a part of that decision-making, it could come to question. Here's the other part that I think Joy shared, and I think the other person. If it's in your bylaws and you wrote it that way, then you are following your bylaws. By all means, I'm not saying not do that. But what I am saying is that I would definitely study that particular practice and study the effectiveness of that practice as you move forward. but that's a little bit of a slippery slope. That is one individual.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
So if I were on your board, Joy, I have not lived the experience likely that your nonprofit, which I just looked up, is reaching out for, right? And I would depend heavily on the ED to guide me to an understanding of the lived experience so that I can make a vote that has an impact on the community that maybe I just can't understand because I've not lived it, you know? And I think our role as ED is to ignite our board members and educate our board members and our community why those voices have to be strong. I am saying this and also living on the same seat of, I don't love the structure of nonprofit boards, and I don't love all of the fact that my board has so much of a role in a job that they never see. They only see the outcomes. They're not here. They don't know my patients. They don't know me really. So I stand with you in that regard, but I think it's a really cool opportunity for you to help that lived experience be heard as much as it can. It can't be entirely understood, but yeah, I just want to tell you, like, I relate to you, and in that regard.
I hear you and I respect you, Summer. And of course, I respect everybody here. I just think it's so different that there isn't even time to explain. Right. It's actually exhausting as a Black woman for me to have to explain to other folks who are not Black birthing people. That will actually stress. It actually has caused me burnout to the point where my immune system was suppressed and I've ended up in the hospital. So I'm not doing that. But also, too, we have to understand where the importance of power sharing is, and I ain't gonna get on my soapbox, but for my organization, we are not doing that because it will cause our people harm, and that's just it. Best practices, Black maternal health rates have gotten worse in the last 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10. We can't do what y'all do. It's like we got a special needs baby. So y'all have milestones of development. We have to have different milestones of development, a different care team, a different print. So I get it and I soak in information and I take what I can use and what I can't use. But literally, I would be helping to kill mamas and babies if I operated in the same way that y'all operate. And so, you know, we just gonna have to take that with a grain of salt.
Understood. Thank you, Joy. And I'm gonna have to move on, y'all. I gotta move on. We are very, very open to some of you reaching out to us. You know, just let us know, and we can go into a space that's a little bit more private to talk about your individual concerns. But collectively, in terms of what we know, is kind of the spirit in which we do this institute and share this information. So let's look at duties of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Here is where, and this is on page 32 of your workbook, and also on page 33. And team, I know I gotta work in our objectives, and I'm gonna get them, I'm gonna complete them. My team is probably going, whoa, where are we going? How, you know, how are we gonna get through what we need to get through? But this always happens with board governance, in terms of the practices, the approach we take, why each nonprofit does what it does, the way that it does, the values of our nonprofits, the beliefs of our nonprofits, and all those things are factored in as to why and how we do what we do. And we embrace that uniqueness of each and every nonprofit that we interface with as it relates to that. Context does matter, and I appreciate all the context that was shared as it relates to board governance so far. So our duty of care, our duty of loyalty, and our duty of obedience, These are expected of ourselves as a full board and also as individual board members. And so we are expected to function in a way where we are caring for our nonprofits, that we are showing loyalty towards our nonprofits, and that we are obedient to the laws and the policies of the organization's mission and in compliance with legal statute. And that is what we've been talking about in the last 15, 20 minutes, is that there are certain policies that we have as individual nonprofits and the ways in which our bylaws are written as to how our board should function. And I should say, and we're going to look at some sample bylaws in a minute, let me say that our bylaws, the very nature of bylaws is that it defines and describes exactly how the board of directors is supposed to function. Exactly how it's supposed to function. So each and every nonprofit wrote its own set of bylaws. And when you look at those bylaws, it should help frame the way in which we demonstrate duty of care, and that we demonstrate duty of loyalty, and that we demonstrate duty of obedience as it relates to nonprofits. These three areas of duties, these were established as a result of a court case many years ago in terms of the responsibility of a board of directors, when something goes wrong. And so in terms of looking at this, this is the way in which we should be aligning ourselves. What we want to do is show a sample bylaws just to kind of help us. Some of us may have never seen a set of bylaws, but the bylaws is where, and I think Joy referred to this, referred to their bylaws and how they're written. The bylaws instruct each and every nonprofit board of directors on how it's supposed to function. And that is the go-to. Those bylaws, when that nonprofit was established, there was a set of bylaws that was submitted to the Internal Revenue. And while those bylaws can be amended as you go forward, that is the tool or the document that guides the way in which we're supposed to function. So I'm going to have the team show some sample bylaws, and bylaws have, for the most part, they have the same framing, to guide us as it relates to a board. So typically what you're going to see is the name of the organization. You're going to see the purpose of that nonprofit. So this is the Guilford County Resource and Referral Center. I helped establish this nonprofit in 2009. And so we're using this sample. The organization is mentioned. If you go on up to Article 2, there's typically a purpose for the nonprofit. This particular nonprofit has principles for practice, and so those are identified in the bylaws along with the mission statement. This is not a membership nonprofit, other than there are board members. But this particular nonprofit does not take in like members for dues or anything like that. There's a section related to the meetings and when the meetings are and how long they last, and what a quorum is, and what happens if there's a special meeting, etc. So there's a section about meetings. You can keep going. Then there's a section on voting. So some nonprofits do not use Robert's rules. Some nonprofits vote by consensus. Some nonprofits vote in different ways. And so, but again, it is your bylaws that give you those instructions and guidelines on how to do that. There, oftentimes in the bylaws, there's an order of business in terms of how the meetings are structured. So how the board meetings are structured. And typically there's a little bit of an outline of that in the bylaws. You can keep going. In terms of the board of directors, in general, there's a description on how we administrate the board. Again, the meeting, how many votes the board member has in this particular example. You can keep going. We also have included here, come down a little bit. This particular nonprofit, there's an expectation that board members are going to give some level of a financial contribution. This isn't necessarily in all bylaws for all board members. These bylaws also have the different positions that make up the officers. So for this particular nonprofit, it is the president, the vice president, the secretary, and treasurer that make up the executive committee. You can keep going. Keep going. So those are all the different positions. For this particular nonprofit and most nonprofits, a board of directors is a volunteer body, and they're not typically compensated. So we don't pay boards of directors for 501c3s. There are committees, and then oftentimes in the bylaws, there is specific instructions on each and every committee. This could be enhanced to include all of your different committees. The last section of this, these bylaws are if there's going to be a change or an amendment, there's some instructions on how you go about making changes to the bylaws. You can keep going, scrolling up. Yep. Oh yeah, thank you. So, so this is a sample bylaws document. If you haven't taken time to look at the bylaws for your nonprofit, I would encourage you to do so. That is where you are going to find those instructions. And keep in mind, I say from the very beginning of this Nonprofit Management Institute, and I've said it probably 1,000 times today already, every nonprofit functions differently. But there are some elements of each and every nonprofit that we know that are very, very similar, if not in some cases the exact same. But bylaws are a common document that your nonprofit should have, and it should help your board chair and your executive director, CEO. It should help them manage the board. That's what it's laid out to do. Thoughts about bylaws? I'm opening up for that, but also at the same time, I'm going to have to move us along. Thoughts about the bylaws or questions?
Are there any major times when your bylaws should be revisited and changed?
You know, since COVID, bylaws have been revisited a lot. That external factor has caused a lot of organizations to go back and revisit their bylaws. If for nothing else, now they have to put that they meet by Zoom or they meet virtually. It's probably good to revisit the bylaws, you know, on a regular cycle. What that might be, I don't have a recipe for that. I do think, however, when you start to read your bylaws and you start to see that it's inconsistent with the essence and nature and what it is that you do, you might find that you need to make those changes. You know, if I were an executive director or CEO of a nonprofit day to day, I'd probably be looking at those bylaws quite often, actually, because that's my tool to help me to know how to engage my board and to keep my board on track. Paola, I see your hand up.
Gracias. Es con referencia a la pregunta de Leslie. Entonces los estatutos sí se pueden cambiar y modificar. Igual la misión de la organización se puede perfilar también, ir cambiando. ¿Y cómo afecta esto el hecho de que la IRS te haya dado tu número de como organización? ¿Afecta los cambios que le hagas a lo que la IRS te dio inicialmente? ¿Hay que volver a pedir o cómo funciona eso? Gracias.
Now, what I will say is I'm going to back you up to the North Carolina Secretary of State. There is a disclaimer, there's a note with the Secretary of State that if you amend your bylaws or your articles, that you're supposed to provide them the updated ones. So for the state, that is the case. The IRS is not as blatant as that. There are organizations that are 100 years old, and if you look at their bylaws, they're still the ones that were typed on a manual typewriter. I mean, the ones that they submitted to the Internal Revenue. So you can change those bylaws anytime you need to. If there's not a section in your bylaws already on how to amend them, then you probably need to start there with, you know, when and how or under what circumstances can we amend these bylaws? Can you adjust your mission? Yes, you can adjust your mission. If you are adjusting your mission completely, like you go from a nonprofit focusing on housing to a nonprofit focusing on advocacy for school-age children or something like that, then you're changing the essence of your nonprofit. And there are instructions with the Internal Revenue for that. So I'm going to defer you to or send you to the irs.gov. You go under public charities. It's going to give you those frequently asked questions, and it's going to give you some specific instructions on how to go about doing that. But to answer your question in general, you can change any of those things. I know that was fast talking, but I'm trying to be helpful to our participants. Any other questions, Lisa, that we see?
Nope, I think you're good to keep going.
All right, page 33 in your workbook, board responsibilities checklist. We've actually been talking about that for the past hour, what our responsibilities are. And so there are elements and items that are listed there that we're going to continue to cover as we move forward with our time today in terms of what we are focusing on. Is there anything on that list that when you look at that list, you say to yourself, I don't know what this is? I see a question, Lisa.
That just popped in. Leslie wants to know, is that an actual law, not paying a 501c3 board?
So let me, it is not a law. So it's not a legislative law. When your nonprofit completed the 1023 application with the Internal Revenue, there is a question in that application that asks, are your board members compensated? And when you check yes, then the IRS asks you for details on why and how you are paying board members. So I'm going to direct you back to your 1023 application and what was submitted to the Internal Revenue. You can also contact the Internal Revenue. I know that's not something we all typically want to do, is reach out to the Internal Revenue, but you can definitely do that. But I repeat, in the application, when your nonprofit applied for its 501c3, there is a question in that application that asks, do you or are you paying your board of directors? And if you are, then there's a different set of criteria that the Internal Revenue considers because you are doing that. And they want details as to why you are doing that. A 501c3 is a public charity or private charity. And so because it is a charity and it is given tax exempt status, it is questioned when you pay board members. Does that help? Okay. Lisa, do we see?
I have a question on the list. It has serving as a court of appeals. What does that mean?
So oftentimes there are nonprofits that provide services, and or they might be awarding grants, or they might be disseminating a resource of some type. And there are occasions when that nonprofit, it might be questioned on the process that they use to make their selection. And so the board then would have in place, the organization as a whole the board included, would have a way in which individuals can appeal decisions. It doesn't apply to every nonprofit.
I think Leslie was going to jump in with another question as well.
Okay.
No, you're good, Leslie? No.
Well, I was just going to make a comment that I've run into funding consultants lately that have championed paying board members, and it caused angst and anxiety for me even having the conversation. So I wanted to hear your professional opinion on that. I know that sometimes very, very, very large nonprofit boards may consider it, and that happens for corporate boards, but it's just different. And not only that, but there are other entities that ask you if you pay your board. When grant writing, a lot of them are asking. Solicitation license, you would have to report all those kinds of things. So there's so much more reporting that has to happen if you decide that you are large enough and, you know, able to do that. It's just a whole nother world. So I just wanted to mention it just in case anybody in this workshop has experienced that.
Absolutely. And to that point, and I know we're not necessarily talking about this per se, in post-COVID time, the internal revenue has ramped up its staffing related to 501c3s. And so I think it is important for all of us to be in the know as to what the internal revenue expects of us as nonprofit organizations in general, as this change is happening. And some of you may have already experienced that with submitting your 990s and all those kinds of things. There are some things changing within the nonprofit corporation kind of division of the internal revenue. So I do think that's important to share. And that's that item on the list, ensuring legal compliance. In terms of the 501c3 status, I do think it's important to keep up with what's happening, both with the Secretary of State's office and also with the Internal Revenue. Okay, so we are at team, we are at 11:34, and we have a couple of more, if not 3 more, I think, pieces of work that we want to focus on before our time ends today. And so I don't want us not to get to what we need to get to, but we need to take a break. So let's take a 5-minute break. And it is 11, let's just say 35. So we'll come back at 11:40. And team, if we could just chat a little bit about where we are in our material and just kind of how we want to move forward. And the group will just have to hear us chat because we need to revisit that. And do the slide 19. So here is our check-in for our work today, and we're always excited about doing the Nonprofit Management Institute. We know that this resource is important to the nonprofit sector in our state, and so we are our conversation and work that we've been doing this morning on board governance is critical work. And it's essential to each of us who are representing a nonprofit and working in a nonprofit and wanting to do that work in a way that aligns with what we should be doing as it relates to leadership and management. So much appreciation for all of the robust discussion and questions and all of that. This is needed and why we do the work that we do at the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. We are at accountability and evaluation, composition, bylaws, and legal compliance. we've got these topics to cover. We're going to emphasize accountability and evaluation and bylaws and legal compliance. We've had lots of questions around the functionality of the board and how the board should be functioning. What should it do? What should it not do? And so we want to lean in on these two aspects of our work today. Composition, we've been talking about pretty much all morning in terms of the board structure and who should be on the board and so on and so forth. So we're gonna hone in on accountability and evaluation and bylaws and legal compliance. If you would turn in your workbooks, and we can leave this slide up for now, turning your workbooks to page 35.
And Dr. Palmer, can you make a quick mention about financial management while you're skipping that?
Oh, yes. So we're not skipping it.
Yeah.
But what
right.
we are doing is we have a session on financial management as a part of the Institute. And we have a session specifically on fundraising. And so we will be, we will cover that part of what we're doing already later in the Institute. And so we're gonna talk about the board governance and include that when we get to that part, and we do it anyway. So that's why we are focusing in on accountability and evaluation and bylaws and legal compliance. Okay, so if you look at page 35 of your workbook, you've heard me say oversight and governance probably 100 times this morning. And so when we talk about oversight, the board of directors is responsible for oversight. What we're saying in practical terms is that the oversight is ensuring that the organization is successful, ensuring that the nonprofit is successful. So we raise money. We are of influence. We provide certain skills. We're ambassadors. We are part of a board to help strengthen the nonprofit as a whole. So we're wanting to see the organization be successful. And so that's what oversight is all about. Governance is protecting the public interest. And let's talk about that. 501c3s, public charities, our missions are related to the public. And it's related to us being helpful in our communities and in public spaces. And so we try to make sure we have an executive director or president and CEO that can help us champion that mission that we have agreed to our community. And also we look at the performance of that individual. We pay attention to plans and work plans and strategic plans, and we make sure we're doing committee work and all of that. We also are highlighting and paying attention to compliances that help us to maintain our 501c3. And if our nonprofit is under a contract and grants for that matter, we're also making sure that we're being responsible to what we promised in those agreements. And then we are evaluating the impact of what it is that we're doing. And are we really seeing that vision that we've outlined? Are we really seeing progress towards achieving that? So when we say oversight and governance, that's what we're talking about. I think I have a question in the chat about the bullet item. So one of the examples, I think if I caught that, one of the examples that is bulleted in the description of oversight is around marketing and promoting the organization. When we are a board as a whole, and as individual board members, we are ambassadors for that nonprofit, and we have influence in our communities. And so a part of our responsibility is to share what our nonprofit does and what and how it impacts and contributes to our community. It's a part of our responsibility to do that. And oftentimes a board of directors will have a marketing and PR committee, that actually focuses on that. So I hope that's helpful. And I should also add, we could add 100 more bullet points under each one of these in terms of kind of how we interpret oversight and governance. Is that helpful? Trying to look at the items in the chat.
You're good. I mean,
Okay, great.
Andre makes a comment, but he
Okay,
says
great.
committees are a good way to, for subject matter.
And
expert.
if we could go back to the gallery view. So we're going to focus in on quite a few handouts in your workbook. So I'm going to give those page numbers. So if you could turn to your workbook, as we talk about accountability and evaluation. What's so great about this material, well, the Institute as a whole, is that now you have a library of resources that you can refer to kind of help you as you're moving throughout your days in the work that you do with your nonprofit. And so from page 35, 33, we've already covered. That was the board responsibilities checklist. That's a handout that you have. Board of Directors job descriptions, that comes next. That's on page 36. Page 37, the Board of Directors versus the Executive Director. Boy, have we been talking about that this morning. We've been talking about that a lot. And so there's a resource there. There is a job description for the chair of the board that we've provided. And this is probably one of my favorite handouts. I say this about all the handouts, but this is one of my favorite because it gives you a comparison of the board chair and the executive director, because that can be a little confusing for some of us. Is, well, what does the board chair do that the executive director doesn't do? And what does the executive director do that the board chair doesn't do? And so what we highlight here, because this is all about board governance, is we highlight the functionality and the role of the board chair. So I'll come back to that one, but I just want to point that out, that that's what we're working on. And then we will get into evaluation here in just a minute. So let's talk about the page 36. So we've been talking about executive committee, right? You've heard me refer to the executive committee as the officers of the board. The first place you want to turn to when it comes to the board of directors job descriptions and the officers, the first place you want to go is the bylaws. The bylaws should give you an indication of the various officers that are to be appointed, voted on, selected for your nonprofit. It's different from nonprofit to nonprofit. So when you look at page 36, that would be the vice chair, the secretary, and the treasurer. Those are your officers. And so we've given you an indication here of what those individuals do. And for some of you, when you look at your bylaws, you may very well see the same identical language in terms of the roles of your officers. The board chair has a separate description altogether, and that comes next. Notice we also included a second iteration of a board member, and then a chair of a committee. So if we're going to have committees, then we also want to have chairs of those committees. Again, this is fundamental, very fundamental. And the reason I say that is because it should be in your bylaws. It may not be as explicit. And if you want it to be more explicit, then you can enhance your bylaws. But that is where you'll find a description of how unique it is to your nonprofit organization. The board of directors versus the executive director. So if you look at page 36, the way in which we describe a board or the elements of a board is the board of directors as a whole, individual board members, officers, committee chairs. These are all individuals who provide leadership to that nonprofit. And so again, we're talking board governance here, board governance. We have a full description of the board chair on page 38, just like we have a description of the other officers. If you look at page 37, and we look at the difference between the executive director and the board of directors, the board creates policies and the executive director carries out those policies and ensures that those policies and those procedures are followed as it relates to managing that nonprofit on a day-to-day basis. The board sets the guidelines for the way in which it functions. And the executive director helps to set the guidelines in terms of how we work on a day-to-day basis. Boards contribute to that through committee work. And so that's important to understand as well. Let's go to page 39. Again, we're talking about accountability, and we are looking at evaluation as it relates to our board in this particular part of our work. We've got the board chair and what the board chair does, and we've got the executive director and what the executive director does, and that's on page 39. The board chair is the leader of the board of directors. In essence, they supervise the board members, and they give instructions, they give direction in alignment with where the nonprofit is going per the executive director or president and CEO. And I can't emphasize enough, the board chair and the executive director or president and CEO are working in partnership. They are collaborating. And that is why it is so important when we are determining who the board chair is, it's very important that we try to have a really good match. Because if not, it can cause us problems down the road. So it's important for us to try to have a really good match there. So, yeah. I think I saw a question in terms of is it the board chair?
It's Summer's question. I've not heard of the board chair determining compensation of staff. Is this typical? I know budget is set by board, but are individual wages?
So when we look at compensation from the perspective of a board member, we're looking at it in terms of the budget. So when we talk about it's on for the whole group, it's on page 39, and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 bullet point down, determines annual compensation of the ED and staff. Because the board approves the budget, and because compensation is such a significant salient part of the budget, it is important that they are a part of that decision making. Again, it's the executive director and the board chair and board working in partnership and collaboration. So oftentimes a nonprofit will have a human resource committee, and oftentimes those things related to compensation, benefits, and the like will come up in that committee work. So it is not that they are making the sole decision, but they are part of collaborating with that executive director to make those decisions. Is that helpful? With whoever had that question.
She said, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if I could leave us with anything related to board governance as a whole, it doesn't matter if we're talking about the whole board or board members. The board of directors is working in partnership and collaboration with the executive director and president and CEO. We are one team, and we should be working together. And executive directors and presidents and CEOs, we should be a resource to our board so that they have adequate information, they have facts and stats so that they can do their work as it relates to governance and oversight. That's very important to understand. We are working in partnership and collaboration. Very important. I can't tell you how many times I show up to work with a nonprofit related to board governance and the inner workings and the interpersonal relationships with the ED or the president and CEO. Because oftentimes we're not understanding what our role is. Okay. The other kind of part of what I need you to add to your notes related to accountability and evaluation is strategic planning. And we will also have a specific session on strategic planning. The board of directors is very instrumental in that process as well. And we will go deep into the weeds on strategic planning, but that's important for us to understand and remember too, as it relates to that. The other thing I'll say, give it time. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, give it all time for you to kind of get to this place with your board. The next thing that we want to focus on is looking at evaluating our board and evaluating the executive director, because we've been talking about that a lot today. And so what I want to point out is I want to point out 2 worksheets that we've provided for you. The first worksheet is the review of the executive director. One of the ways to shore up your performance evaluation for your executive director is to have a very clear job description of what the executive director is responsible for in terms of their duties, in terms of competency, in terms of skills, in terms of education. It's very important to have a job description for the executive director. And we put this worksheet in the workbook so that you could literally pull out your executive director job description and kind of answer these questions and make any tweaks and adjustments to shore up that job description. Here's where we oftentimes we miss the mark with our nonprofit organizations, especially our smaller ones, is that we don't evaluate the executive director and president and CEO on a regular basis. We'll put it off, and it should be annual. We should be evaluating the executive director or president and CEO every year. And that is a task that the board is responsible for. So that is an area that sometimes when the founder is the executive director, sometimes what we will do is we will say, oh, well, they're the founder of the organization. We don't need to evaluate. They know what they're doing. But executive director, president and CEO, encourage your board to evaluate you. Make sure that that is documented, that you have been evaluated on a regular basis. So that's why we put that worksheet there, is so that that kind of helps you to begin to review that job description and make sure that it is as clear as it can possibly be, being that it is a job description. That's important. Another worksheet that we have for you is on page 41. And here, what we suggest is that the board evaluate itself. So, and it is not inappropriate for the board to get feedback from the president and CEO or the executive director on how, they think they're doing. I mean, it goes both ways. And so we should be able to have genuine, productive dialogue and conversations around how are we doing as a board? And so we put that worksheet in there for you as well, in terms of evaluating our boards of directors. So what I would like to do is I would like for you to go ahead and evaluate your board. You've got 10 items that we want you to rate. And then there is a list of open box items at the bottom of areas that you might think that the board should improve on in the coming year. So let's take a couple of minutes here for you to evaluate your board. So this is each of your individual board members could do this, and then you could bring that feedback together and have a discussion about how you want to enhance as a board. So I'm just going to pause here and give you time we're going to stay in the gallery for this, but give you time to evaluate. There are some open-ended questions. As I mentioned before, section 2 has an open-ended question there, but then also section 3 has some open-ended questions. But we want you to become familiar with this tool, because after all, we're talking about board governance and how can we enhance the way in which we govern and provide oversight if we don't assess ourselves. So that's what this tool is intended to do. The Board of Directors evaluation is on page 41 in English and 42 in Spanish. Is that right? It popped up so quick. Hold on. So let me do somewhat of a check-in. You're evaluating your board. We've heard quite a bit today about governance and oversight from a lot of different perspectives, and that's good because there are subsectors of nonprofits, and there are nonprofits that are unique and different in terms of mission and vision outright. So give me a sense of, and you can unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. Right now, I'm thinking, or right now, I'm feeling what as it relates to board governance. And you can unmute or you can go straight into the chat.
Hola, ¿sí me puede escuchar ahora?
Yes.
Ah,
Yes.
perfecto. Ok, y sigo arrastrando. Me llamo Jenny Hernández, soy
Now it
la
just went low again. It just went
Ok.
low.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Soy Jenny Hernández y soy la directiva de la colaborativa La Milpa, que está en Asheville. Tengo muchas dudas en este momento porque justamente vamos a revisar los estatutos de la organización después de 5 años. Y nuestros valores son más horizontales que verticales. Entonces las dudas son, ¿qué de todo esto que está acá puede ser como dado la vuelta o cambiado de alguna forma para que la mesa directiva corresponda a los valores horizontales de la organización? Entonces, me gustaría saber qué de esto puede como disolverse esas líneas tan verticales, qué de estas cosas que están aquí pueden ser vistas como o cambiadas o no sé, vistas de otra manera menos estructurada y tan jerárquica. No sé si eso es posible. Entiendo que lo financiero, nuestra presidenta de la mesa directiva nos dijo, nosotros, díganme qué es lo que no pueden hacer. Pregunten siempre qué es lo que no pueden hacer y la mesa directiva les va a responder. Lo que puedan hacer es casi como cualquier cosa puedes hacer, pero dime a mí, pregúntame qué es lo que no puedes hacer. Entonces, viendo esto, esta estructura tan jerárquica, me surgen muchas dudas.
I think in terms of a beginning place would be the bylaws, if we're talking about board governance. You know, if that's where I would start. I would start at board governance. I would start at all of the informative documentation that describes or gives an explanation of why this organization was established. And I would, from a board governance perspective, I would start with the bylaws. That's where I would start. There are some common sections of the bylaws that you will see across nonprofit organizations. But though the bylaws gives you the opportunity to customize the way in which your board governs and provides oversight. So that's where I would start. If we're talking about the organization as a whole, that's another conversation. But if we're talking about board governance, that's where I would begin.
Dr. Palmer, most folks are commenting, but I think I have on here, someone's asking, how do you get the board to evaluate themselves? If I read that correctly.
You asked them. I mean, I'm just, without context, it's hard for me to give a customized recommendation. Yeah, I don't have enough context. I need to know a little bit more.
Mhm.
I do think, again, that starting place is bylaws, and it can be accompanied by most any other tool that the organization deems necessary for it to shore up and make clear the governance and oversight of a nonprofit. So, yeah. Any,
I thought Maya's comment was very interesting. I didn't know if she wanted to verbally expand upon that a little bit more, not to put you on the spot. But,
okay.
Or would you rather me just read it? I can't see her face.
Maya, do you want to be your own voice?
Sorry, I was just saying that I'm really thinking about the history of the nonprofit industrial complex and how certain approaches to governance can be places that can create more harm, which we kind of talked about earlier, and how to approach it from a holistic care and equity standpoint, because we can replicate harmful oppressive structures within that without meaning to. And it's complex, and I know we don't really have time to get into the weeds of it, but I'm really questioning and thinking about how to blend the comment about what is illegal and what is not illegal and what is frowned upon. So what's the dotted line of the situation? So the optics of the thing and how it's perceived versus the bold line of you will go to jail and everyone you know will go to jail are the things I'm kind of like interested in. As we talk about shifting certain things for the organization that I currently am in help of governing. And one of the things that my org has been talking about is we're not here to manage people, we're here to manage systems, because managing people comes from a very harmful historical background of slavery. And how do we move towards moving people into governing the systems that we want to help to grow our communities' access to care and resources. So that's kind of what I'm grappling with right now. I'm sorry for talking really fast and interpreters.
No, no, thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing. Your voice is definitely needed. And I would say that I think each of us, as we look at the history of why nonprofits were established from the get-go, we could definitely have some dialogue around that. While that history and that context, it definitely matters. We also know that a public charity 501c3 status is not necessarily the structure that works for what it is that an entity or group of individuals or persons might be trying to accomplish. The 501c3 designation is one of about 50. There are different designations related to setting up a nonprofit. And so I don't know, Lisa and Rebecca, I think this focus that has emerged as a part of this discussion today may warrant some follow-up dialogue with those who are interested in doing so. So Rebecca and or Lisa, I'll let you decide how to get maybe a list going of the individuals in this institute that want to do a little bit more as it relates to them really adopting this whole 501c3 status as the designation. But I do want to encourage all of us to look at those other designations too, because it may just be that there's a different one that would work more, that would be a little bit more in alignment with your values and beliefs.
You have time to address a good question from Leslie?
Okay. Yes, but can we get those names of those?
Yeah, I
individuals?
have
Oh,
them
okay.
down. I've been doing it.
Okay, good.
So Leslie's asking, what are your thoughts on the ED in concert with the board, identifying the need for skills needed in new board members? How would you use good checks and balances to avoid the board and the CEO stacking for personal missions?
So the first part of that is there are instruments out there, inventory instruments, skills, knowledge, expertise, inventories that you could use to help you identify, whatever composition or whatever it is you think you need on your board in order for you to move your mission and vision forward. The other part of that question, again, that's one of those where I don't have enough context to really give you a customized response. But what I will say is that stacking the board is not a practice that we encourage. But it just depends on some other things that may be happening in your structure. So I don't have a one answer. I don't have one way of answering that question.
I think you're good to move on.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So I want us to take a look at the legal compliance checklist. That is going to be the last thing that we focus on today. And so if I could get you to put that link in the chat or kind of guide the group on how to access that checklist. And then if you could populate that checklist on the screen, that would be great. So we've been talking about bylaws a lot today, and the bylaws are our guidelines as to how the board is supposed to govern and provide oversight. There's also there are some quote unquote legal compliance items that we should be mindful of. The North Carolina Center for Nonprofits ongoingly on a day-to-day basis is keeping up with what the expectations are for 501c3s in the state of North Carolina in particular. And then of course, as it relates to the internal revenue. And I'm gonna let one of my team members tell us how to access this checklist, and then we're gonna show it.
Rebecca, are you good on this part?
Yes. Yep.
While she is pulling up the checklist, we talked about term limits. So when we talk about following our guidelines, board members have term limits, and those are outlined in the bylaws. Conflict of interest, typically there is a conflict of interest statement and or a policy that helps to guide board members when there is a conflict of interest. Typically, there's no monetary compensation for board members. And again, there are some legal compliance items that we should keep in mind. And what I will say, when you look at this checklist, there's probably not one item on here that we haven't touched on today. So when we look at, if you go back to the top of the list, and can you make it just a tad bit bigger so we can see so I want us to look at the have you column. And so when a nonprofit is being established, when it's created, these first items are items that typically are required and requested per either the Secretary of State's office and or the Internal Revenue. The application that a nonprofit completes in order to request tax exemption under the 501c3 designation is the 1023 application. And so articles of incorporation, that's something that we're expected to have. updating any change in information related to our nonprofit and its articles are to be sent to the Secretary of State's office. Physical address changes, phone numbers, whoever the primary registered agent of that nonprofit is important. You can keep going. We've talked about the 1023. That is the application that you file. You can keep going. The 990, that is an annual document that is required by the Internal Revenue that you submit related to your financial activity. Board members, making sure that they understand duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of obedience. Making sure that that we have a conflict of interest policy. And quite often, board members are expected to sign a conflict of interest each and every year. That is a practice for some, but definitely upon being onboarded to the nonprofit. Making sure that we understand really the 501c3 public charities in terms of being able to in all of the guidelines related to the Internal Revenue Code and what that means. Looking at public support versus not public support and how it wants to function that way. You can keep going. These items are all related to the Internal Revenue. You can keep going. Making sure that, like I said, that we submit that Form 990. We should be nonpartisan as a 501c3. You can keep going. In terms of looking at choosing any other type of 501c designation, we might have to revisit that from time to time. A charitable solicitation license with the Secretary of State's office in North Carolina. You can keep going. You can keep going. Trying to see, paying attention to any of the criteria for the state of North Carolina in terms of sales and various taxes if they apply. You can keep going. You can keep going. And I think that is kind of what I wanted to highlight. But we do have this compliance checklist. And this is not just for, this is not just related to board governance. Let me say that. We just want you to know that this is available to you as a resource. This is also as it relates to your staff of your nonprofit, depending upon what their job or their role is. So for example, if you have a development officer on your staff, then they would be honing in on those things related to fundraising and fund development. If you have a liaison staff person between the board and the organization itself, then there are elements there. The chief financial officer, there are elements related to compliance that are specifically in alignment with the financial management of that nonprofit. And we can go back to gallery. We don't want to overwhelm you with that checklist, but that checklist, again, aligns with different management functions. And so there are going to be individuals on your staff, if they are managing the finances, then they're going to be more knowledgeable about those things. If they are managing fundraising, then they're going to be more knowledgeable about those things. The expectation is not for you to be fluent in each and every one of those areas out of the gate. That's not the expectation. But it is important for you to know where to look and what some of those items are as it relates to legal compliance. So that is the importance of showing and sharing that. I am going to pass the time over to the remaining time over to the team. That concludes our topics for today as it relates to board governance. And I think that is Lisa.
Yep. So one of the things I didn't notice, thank you, Dr. Palmer. I think I noticed one person answered Dr. Palmer's question about how you feeling, how you doing. I didn't look. I think they all got distracted with something else. But go ahead as you get ready to sign off today. Not yet. I mean, don't sign off yet. But put your comment, your one word, how you feeling, how you doing. Just put it on in there in the chat before you go. Don't forget to fill out our evaluation. And I also wanted to say thank you all for being so brave, speaking up in the spaces that you have. It's been a wonderful, good feedback conversation. As you see, our next session will be program design management and evaluation that's coming up. And I also want to bring a brief mention to after this, starting up in May, we have a EDI session, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We will be sending out information very shortly. And I would like to send it out to this group as well. It's called Building Equity and Anti-Racist Change Agents to address some of the inequities that are present in our nonprofit orgs. We did touch upon some of those things today, and we'll go into much depth guided conversations, and these are 6 sessions that happen over time. So be looking out for that in your email, and those of you who are interested and want to join us for these conversations, please sign up. We're looking to do this cohort I believe Jean mentioned it in our earlier on when we first started. We're looking to fill 10 seats, white participants, and Bill Pock in our other 10. So we have an equal group there to have this conversation. And again, they're guided conversations that we'll have. So thank you. I see the words popping in that we're going to take a minute to look at before we all sign off, to see what you're saying and feeling. Other than that, go get some lunch, reflect, let your brain release a little bit. And we hope to see y'all next week for program design and management. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
Lisa, as we're making, oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
I was just going to remind folks, Brittany brought up an important reminder. If you are a member, you can get the legal compliance checklist downloaded for free. You just need to make sure that you're logged into your member account or create your member login on our website, and then go ahead and request that download. So just wanted to mention that. And I'll put that Facebook group page link in there so you can request to join that. I'd love to see you all sharing support to one another and ideas on how you're seeking to create an organization structure that is less vertical and more horizontal. Would love to see some sharing of ideas, resources, support, because we all know that being in it together is how we're going to come up with the best way forward. So really excited to see that happening in this group, and would love to see it continue on the Facebook group page. And thank you to our interpreters. Yes, Lisa, we couldn't do this without you all. And thanks for your patience as we adjust to that and make it a good experience for everyone.
And if we all could stay on, our interpreters and staff, for a few minutes afterwards. Thank you.
Yep.
Sure. Yep.
Everyone have a great day.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you next week. Look out.